Welcome to the second in a series of 3 videos in which I discuss the key requirements, 3 key requirements to prevent a heart attack or a stroke. And today is the second requirement. And if you haven't watched the first video, please do watch it before you continue watching this, as it constitutes a foundation to what I'm going to share with you today in this presentation. I'm also going to share a visual aid just to try to make things as clear as possible. And the second requirement to prevent a heart attack or a stroke, and today I'm going to start actually providing some more practical guidance, things to maybe not do, but to avoid, is to understand. The second requirement is to understand what causes plaque in the arteries, because this way you can take the right preventative and corrective measures. If you don't know what causes plaque in the arteries and you just address it with medications, well, fine. But as I mentioned in the first video, they might be needed sometimes, but they don't address the process of hardening and narrowing of the arteries. They don't do anything to stop it or to reverse it. And so I'll start by an analogy to explain what it is that causes plaque buildup in the arteries. I'll suggest that plaque in the arteries is very similar to a scab on the skin. After a cut or a scrape to the skin, the body takes measures to heal it, and a scab is formed on top. And when the skin heals, that scab sloughs off. Plaque in the artery is very similar. Ideally, that plaque should slough off as well, because the body does try to take measures to heal and repair the lining of the arteries. Also depend on the extent of scab. You notice that here there are some yellow spots, and these yellow spots basically constitute pus, and pus consists of lipid material, including cholesterol, and it's very similar to a plaque here. So the actual causes of narrowing and hardening of the arteries come from chemical injury, chemical damage to the lining of the artery. See, we don't take an object, a physical sharp object, and scrape the inside of the arteries. The nature of the injury or damage to the arteries is chemical, and it's insidious. It happens over time. A physical injury to the skin occurs every so often, and then there is time to heal. If the damage to the artery is chemical and insidious in nature and happens continuously over time, then healing is more difficult, and the body needs more resources to do that. And I'll speak about that in the third video. So what are these chemical, or what is this chemical injury? Well, most commonly, it comes in the form of oxidation and glycation. So let me explain these to you, and we'll talk about some practical applications here. And common example of oxidation is rust buildup. Everybody has pretty much seen that. Rust buildup on a metal structure. So if we take this structure as an example, this screw, when it becomes fully rusted, the threads, both of the screw and the nut, become corroded and it loses its function. You cannot thread the nut over the screw. Same with the arteries. With excessive oxidation comes hardening of the arteries. They lose their elasticity, and so their function is compromised. With reduced elasticity and flexibility, blood pressure can go up, delivery of blood and oxygen can be compromised, not as effective anymore. There's another visual analogy is this one here. I thought it was really neat, and so I decided to put it here. This resembles a clean and clear artery, and this resembles a plaque-laden artery, and this is what it is. It's a corroded pipe, basically. And this comes from a website that offers a rust removal treatment. So that's why you see before and after here. But I thought it was a neat analogy. And so I would also compare oxidation to fire. Fire can be very useful when it's contained. It can provide us heat, it can warm our food, and indeed oxidation is a chemical process that involves the stripping of electrons from glucose and fat through a series of steps that results in energy production. Okay, I'll go as far as this. I won't get into more details. So when it occurs in balance, it is a natural phenomenon that helps extract energy from food, but it can also get out of hand. So the fire can get out of hand and cause a lot of damage. And oxidation, excessive oxidation, or excessive oxidative stress, it's another way to describe oxidative damage, causes inflammation. Inflammation is the attempt to repair that is unsuccessful. So it causes inflammation, damage to cells and tissues, and is implicated in cardiovascular disease, diabetes, cancer, and other degenerative conditions. So it goes beyond cardiovascular disease. It's implicated in other conditions as well that are associated with. Often you find these conditions in tandem together. A lot of people may have cardiovascular disease and also maybe diabetes and perhaps arthritis, perhaps memory loss and things like that. And cancer can also develop that way. So what are some substances that cause this type of injury? Perhaps we can avoid them altogether. Well, it's well known that cigarettes bring about excessive oxidative damage, and it's well known that cigarettes are associated with increased risk for cardiovascular disease and cardiovascular events like heart attacks and strokes. So very, very important to take into consideration. Fewer people smoke nowadays, which is really important, really good. But anybody who does should really try to find ways to limit the use of cigarettes, try to stop. I know in naturopathic medicine there are different ways to help decrease cravings and manage stress better that can help facilitate that. There are also environmental and household toxins that can contribute to this type of injury. And so the amount of these types of toxins has gone up dramatically over the last 100 years. And so these are some examples. BPA stands for bisphenol A. It's a stuff you find in plastic bottles, and it can cause damage to the lining of the arteries. It can actually also act like an estrogen type substance that would contribute to an irregular heartbeat as well. And different heavy metals like lead and mercury as well. And indeed, sometimes plaque does have heavy metals in it. So where do you get these from? For the longest time, lead was used in making water pipes, for example. So a lot of people who got their water supply from these pipes were more prone to developing cardiovascular disease and heart attacks and strokes. There are different kinds of bacterial toxins, and I'm just putting it out there. I'm not going to say a whole lot about it right now because it requires proper explanation. But basically, most of these toxins come from within. They come from the intestines, and can interact with the lining of the arteries as well through oxidation and so on. And when it comes to our diet, we know that our diet influences our health, and the predominant substance causes, the most common thing people consume causes oxidation. Peroxidation is another term that is used to describe the type of damage that these types of oil can cause. So vegetable oil is enriched in polyunsaturated fatty acids, and I'll speak about it in a moment. And this is the primary type of culprit that causes injury to the lining of the arteries. Paradoxically, it's kind of stuff that has been promoted as healthy. And when I refer to vegetable oil, I talk about things like canola oil and cornseed oil, cottonseed oil, soybean oil, sunflower oil, safflower oil. These types of oils are very, very commonly used in kitchens and in the food industry, and a lot of commercial foods are made from them. So this is actually the easiest thing to limit. Out of all these things, some people might find it hard to get off cigarettes. There's an addictive nature here, and it's hard to escape environmental toxins. Bacterial toxins, another topic, but the easiest thing to avoid is this here. So I'll speak about it in a second. Right here, I'll expand on that. So these graphs just provide the evidence. That's all it is, because these oils are heavily promoted as healthy. And so these graphs provide the evidence to counter that. This shows you the intake of saturated fatty acids for the last 100 years. And for the longest time, we've been told stay away from saturated fat. It's bad for your heart. Well, the consumption of saturated fat has actually started going down significantly in the 1940s and 50s. And so around this time, 1970s and 80s, that was the peak of mortality from cardiovascular disease. So it just shows you that saturated fats probably have very little to do, if anything. And this here represents a saturated fat, and it just comes down to the structure. It's a very stable material. It has no room for oxidative damage. It cannot be damaged by oxidation. It cannot cause peroxidation. Very, very stable. Monounsaturated fatty acids are also relatively stable. So you find saturated fats in things like butter and beef, meat, and things like that. You find in coconut oil and butter. You find avocado. You find monounsaturated fatty acid in olive oil and avocado oil. Those are relatively stable as well. Not as much as the saturated fats, but fairly stable. Another food that has been portrayed as harmful for our health is sugar and carbohydrates, and perhaps in excess, perhaps in refined forms, could be. But the consumption of sugar and carbohydrates has also gone down in the last 25 years or so, and the incidence of obesity, which relates to cardiovascular disease and chronic disease, has gone up during the same period of time. And also in the previous video, I showed you a graph that speaks to the changes in the incidence of cardiovascular disease during the same period of time, and it showed an increase in mortality, or not, in the incidence, sorry, of cardiovascular disease and stroke. So this graph represents the rise in consumption of vegetable oil, of polyunsaturated fatty acids, which come predominantly from vegetable oil, and it is the only one whose consumption patterns really mimic the rise in incidence of cardiovascular disease, and has to do with its chemical structure. It's very unstable. It's prone to oxidation and peroxidation. So hopefully this helps to understand why this is the situation, why this is the case, and provides the evidence to support my assertion. A lot of people find this assertion quite confusing, again, because these oils have been promoted as healthy, and they're nothing but healthy. And you can look at some of the other materials that I've published about it on my website, on YouTube, and so on, and learn more about it. The other type of damage that I talked about earlier, that I mentioned earlier, was glycation. And glycation, I'm not going to speak about it a lot in this presentation. The analogy that some people use is that it's a bit like stickiness, making the arteries more sticky, because glycation refers to glue. It's not exactly that, but the net result is that it does cause damage to the artery walls. It changes the nature of the material within the artery, and the most common culprits of glycation are byproducts of the same thing, vegetable oil. So that's why it's really, really important to try to limit its intake. And so I want to now speak about the reason why you find cholesterol in plaque. If cholesterol doesn't stick to the arteries to cause plaque, if most people have a heart attack, have normal cholesterol, why is there cholesterol in plaque? Well, it comes down to damage to the arteries. So the arteries, much of the artery wall consists of connective tissue, collagen and elastin, these fibers of connective tissue. And these are the components of the artery that get oxidized, get glycated, and require repair, require removal, so that new collagen, new elastin, new artery material can be restored. And that repair occurs with the assistance of white blood cells, macrophages. Their role is to come in and remove useless, damaged, and harmful compounds and debris, including the material that the artery consists of. One of the things that gets damaged, one of the things that gets damaged in that environment are lipids that are present in the vicinity of the artery, that are flowing in the blood plasma in the vicinity of the artery, including cholesterol, get oxidized as well. So the damage doesn't affect just the artery wall, but affects other compounds. And cholesterol itself gets damaged as well. Fatty acids get damaged as well. And so these white blood cells, oxidized lipids, let me read that. Oxidized lipid compounds are removed and are toxic to the white blood cells. They're removed, but they're toxic to the white blood cells. So this results in the white blood cells' death, and their content is spilled at the site of plaque. That's why you see cholesterol and plaque. It's not that cholesterol sticks to the arteries, but these white blood cells are trying to get rid of this toxic type of cholesterol. So hopefully now you understand why there is cholesterol in plaque. There's also cholesterol in pimples, in scabs. We don't treat these with cholesterol-lowering medications, right? The other thing I want to speak to, which often people ask as a result of watching the first video, is what about the difference between LDL and HDL, good cholesterol and bad cholesterol? And so briefly, what's measured in the blood is not cholesterol, actually. What's measured, we talk about cholesterol, but what's measured is lipoprotein. It's a complex that consists of various compounds whose purpose is to carry cholesterol and other fatty material through the blood, because the blood is mostly watery, and fatty material, lipids and fats and oils don't dissolve in water. And so the function of that complex is to shield that and carry it in the blood vessels. These proteins that are part of the lipoprotein complex are water soluble. It's like a trucking system in a way. And it contains all kinds of material. So it contains cholesterol, what's called cholesterol esters, and triglycerides and phospholipids. And in essence, and also contains fat-soluble vitamins. Now, what's the difference between these types of lipids? What's the difference between HDL and LDL? Is one more dangerous than the other? Well, LDL and HDL stand for high density lipoprotein for HDL, and LDL is low density lipoprotein. There's also intermediate density lipoprotein and very low density lipoprotein, what's called chylomicron, which I won't get into right now. The density itself refers to the amount of protein in the complex. The more protein there is and the less fat there is, the more dense it is, so to speak. Well, the thing is, when you have a lot of lipids in there, the chances of having polyunsaturated fatty acids that are prone to oxidation are much higher. And so oxidation and damage to the entire complex, or the chance of oxidation and damage to the entire complex, is much higher. And so that, in essence, in a way, makes low-density lipoprotein more dangerous. And these other components are tested in the blood together with the LDL. These all are considered low-density lipoprotein in a standard blood test for cholesterol. It contains low-density lipoprotein, high-density lipoprotein, triglycerides, and total cholesterol. And HDL has less of these lipids, less chance for having unstable polyunsaturated fatty acids in it, so less chance for injury, and it's less dangerous. However, ultimately, what dictates the proneness to oxidation more than anything else is whether these conditions exist. Let me show you again. Whether these conditions exist. If these conditions don't exist, then it really makes no difference how much cholesterol there's in the arteries. So hopefully this is helpful. Hopefully you understand now better what you can, at the very least, avoid to prevent heart attack or stroke. And again, this is not common knowledge. And this is really important, particularly this piece about vegetable oil. And again, things can be done about these other types of culprits as well, the cigarettes and the environmental toxins. And I'll talk about some of these measures, protective measures and corrective measures, in the next video. In the meantime, if you have any questions, please state them below. Also, please let me know how you found the content of this video. Is it relevant to you? How is it relevant to you? I'd love to hear from you. And I guess you'll see me again in the next video. Thank you for watching.